Let's discuss the Democratic presidential debate and how energy and climate played a role or not.
Yeah, so recently this was the first Democratic presidential primary debate, and I think there were 10 participants on stage. Among those, frontrunner Joe Biden and John Hickenlooper, former Colorado governor. And the big question leading up to this, of course, was how big a topic will be climate and energy policies. And a lot of people were disappointed, to say the least, that less than 10 minutes of the debate were devoted to this topic, and only a few of the participants actually got some comments in on their plans and how they see things. And so the overall common theme that I saw in the few snippets that went out was uh, they had talking points about urgency in extreme weather events connected to climate. And then all of them have their climate and energy policy plans out, similar to the Green New Deal, as we discussed in previous episodes of Power Hour. And they have this common 2030 goal of climate emergency, where the policy pretty much has to have started to have a big impact on reducing CO2 emissions. And then, of course, we are on the side of science theme, and President Trump is not. And the green economy will be a great benefit. So these are the standard talking points that we've witnessed over the last couple of weeks. And that's as much as I got out of the debate, without getting into specifics. I mean, what I found interesting is that all of the Democratic candidates that I saw in the debate pretty much agreed that there was this 2030 deadline of climate policy, so there needs to be a rapid plan. And then they all had these big plans, even without Congress acting as president alone from the executive.
Did they say that, like that Congress would not be involved?
Yeah, so Joe Biden was specifically asked that by the hosts, and he said, "Yeah, I would do a lot of things like President Obama did, a lot of things leading up to the Paris Climate Accords, and then he would work with governors and install like 500,000 charging stations for electric vehicles." This is another common theme, of course, in these Green New Deal type plans. Um, you know, doing what the executive can do. And I'm very, like, I have this model of a republic system where you have the division of power between executive, legislative, and then the court system, of course. And I don't think that's a proper role of a president. But seeing how things have evolved, and now the president and the executive are responsible for permitting pipelines and doing trade business via pipelines and ships and so on with Canada and Mexico and other countries. That's how things are right now. The president is very influential in these issues, and they could act alone. It's a question of how much Congress can restrict the president, but I don't think that's a good model. But that's how things are right now.
So just looking at, because you made some notes about different candidates and
Hmm.
what they said. I mean, one theme is that there's I would say, an eagerness to accept the prospect of doom. So you get, I've mentioned the term existential threat comes up a lot, but here I see irreversible
Yeah.
damage and that kind of thing, or irreparable damage. And it's 12 years. And it's interesting how unself-conscious this is in terms of, I think by this point, at least these people have probably all heard, hey, guess what? There are similar claims, that were made 12 years ago and 24 years ago and 36 years ago. And so this idea of like irreparable damage, and even what does that really mean? So there's an eagerness to believe these kinds of doomsday scenarios. And I think it's connected to another thing, which is that there's an eagerness to do something massive even when it makes basically no common sense. So, 500,000 recharging stations, like for a full EV future. I mean, even there are all these studies about how EVs are incredibly carbon intensive, and there are a whole bunch of reasons, including the power plants that power them and all of the different oil related processes that you need to mine for them and transport the different materials. And it's just, and then even, okay, doing that in America, what is that really going to accomplish? I mean, you could say, yeah, this is a kind of step that may pay dividends in some number of decades, but they're all saying, no, this is urgent. And yet there's nothing in their recommendations that would actually, reduce the rise in global CO2 levels, let alone lower them. So what this has the character of is just, oh, this is a convenient big cause for them, and they're willing to be very sloppy about the threat, and as long as it gives them the pretext for action, and they're willing to be very sloppy about the action in terms of the action, the means doesn't need to lead to the end. And then and also they're just completely leaving out the value of energy and the downside of any of these things going wrong, which I mean, all of these kinds of things go wrong. Certainly if government is handling it, but even if it's just speculative private investment, all kinds of things are going to go wrong. So it's not encouraging that there's just no real thinking, and there's just these talking points, and just all a means to getting power.
Yeah. So the way I see it, there's certainly a set of talking points that the candidates prepared, and it's a stage performance essentially. So, this is different from a detailed written plan that they can think about more. But they have these talking points, and I didn't get the impression that they were really like deep into the matter. So, just to give one example, I don't want to harp too much on any individual there, but Joe Biden said that correctly said that America is responsible for 15% of the emissions, and he thought that this was a big thing, right? But if you think about that, 15% of global emissions is from the American economy, which is per capita a lot compared to other people, because most other people on the planet are pretty poor compared to the average American, of course. But think about what that means for the future, the next 40, 50 years of emissions. Most of the people don't use remotely as much energy as the average American. And America is already only 15% of the global emissions. China is already twice that. And in China, the average Chinese only consumes like a third of the energy that the average American consumes. So there's literally like two or three American populations just in China waiting to get to the level of consumption that the average American enjoys. So just the growth potential in these developing countries is so enormous that the future emissions are so much bigger than what we emitted so far. It's the 15% really is a non-starter, even if you could get that like close to 50% or 0%.